Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 27. In the spring of that year, at the time when kings normally conduct wars, David sent out Joab with his officers and the entire Israelite army. They defeated the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David stayed behind in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of his palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Now, this woman was very attractive. So David sent someone to inquire about the woman. The messenger said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent some messengers to get her. She came to him, and he had sexual relations with her. Now at that time she was in the process of purifying herself from her menstrual uncleanness. Then she returned to her home. The woman conceived and then sent word to David, saying, "I'm pregnant." So David sent a message to Joab that said, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked about how Joab and the army were doing, and how the campaign was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your home and relax." When Uriah left the palace, the king sent a gift to him. But Uriah stayed at the door of the palace with all the servants of his lord. He did not go down to his house. So they informed David, "Uriah has not gone down to his house." So David said to Uriah, "Haven't you just arrived from a journey? Why haven't you gone down to your house?" Uriah replied to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah reside in temporary shelters, and my lord Joab and my lord's soldiers are camping in the open field. Should I go to my house to eat and drink and have marital relations with my wife? As surely as you are alive, I will not do such a thing." So David said to Uriah, "Stay here another day. Tomorrow I will send you back." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem both that day and the following one. Then David summoned him. He ate and drank with him and got him drunk. But in the evening he went out to sleep on his bed with the servants of his lord. He did not go down to his own house. In the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Station Uriah in the thick of the battle, and then withdraw from him, so he will be cut down and killed." So as Joab kept watch on the city, he stationed Uriah at the place where he knew the best enemy soldiers were. When the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, some of David's soldiers fell in battle. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent a full battle report to David. He instructed the messengers as follows: "When you finish giving the battle report to the king, if the king becomes angry and asks you, 'Why did you go so close to the city to fight? Didn't you realize they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Abimelech, the son of Jerub-Besheth? Didn't a woman throw an upper millstone down on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall?' Just say to him, 'Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead.'" So the messenger departed. When he arrived, he informed David of all the news that Joab had sent with him. The messenger said to David, "The men overpowered us and attacked us in the field, but we forced them to retreat all the way to the door of the city gate. Then the archers shot at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's soldiers died. Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead." David said to the messenger, "Tell Joab, 'Don't let this thing upset you. There is no way to anticipate whom the sword will cut down. Press the battle against the city and conquer it.' Encourage him with these words." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she mourned for him. When the time of mourning was past, David had her brought to his palace. She became his wife, and she bore him a son. But what David had done upset the Lord. Yeah. David. So, David, while he was shirking his duties, in that he didn't go to war with the army, but instead remained at home, sees this attractive woman from his rooftop. This being despite the fact that he had many wives already. And sends messengers out to go get this woman. not checking her marital status or anything, just like, she's beautiful, I want her for myself, go get her. He does so, she gets pregnant, she informs him. So he summons her husband to him, which her husband is this Uriah the Hittite, which he was one of David's mighty men, one of David's troops who was excellent in battle. So, in a ploy to hide this sin, David instructs him to go home. Go be with your wife. Go be happy and be with your wife. But Uriah is too duty bound and refuses to do so. He even gets him drunk. David even gets Uriah drunk, and rather than going to his home, he stays with David. And David orders him murdered. Joab complies, and David takes Bathsheba as his wife. Pretty scummy. Yeah. In the whole of the Old Testament literature, there is no chapter more tragic or full of solemn and searching warning than this. In the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, in that part of the world, wars were not normally fought during the winter months, because rains and cold weather made travel and campaigning difficult. Fighting resumed in the spring. David sent Joab, but David remained at Jerusalem. David should have been out at the battle, but he remained behind. In 2 Samuel 10, Joab and the army of the mighty men were preserved against the Syrians and the Ammonites, but they did not win a decisive victory. The decisive victory came when David led the battle at the end of 2 Samuel 10. Both through custom and experience, God told David, "You need to be at the battle," but David remained at Jerusalem. The principle of Galatians 5:16 rings true. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. If David has his intention where God wanted it, he would never put it where God didn't want it. While Joab is busy laying a siege to Rabbah, Satan is to David, and far sooner prevailed from trap. That is, Satan is laying a siege against David. Nevertheless, it is wrong to think that this began the chain of events David followed all the way down to adultery and murder. David showed his disregard to God's plan for marriage many years before, when he took more than one wife. David's practice of adding wives showed a lack of romantic restraint and indulgence of his passions. This corrupt seed, sown long ago, grew unchecked long enough and would bear bitter fruit. Yeah. And also his going over to the Philistines, where he demonstrated a willingness to kill his own compatriots, his own countrymen. I'm sure that didn't do him any favors in this particular trial. As I think of what happened, of this I am sure, that it did not happen all at once. This matter of Bathsheba was simply the climax of something that had been going on in his life for 20 years, from Redpath. Therefore, staying home from battle merely provided opportunity for the long-standing lack of romantic restraint and indulgence of passion to display itself. David arose from his bed and walked on the roof. The Hebrew verb form of walked suggests that David paced back and forth on the roof. He couldn't sleep and was uneasy because he wasn't where God wanted him to be. And he saw a woman bathing. There is little doubt that this woman, later called by the name Bathsheba, acted immodestly. Though it was evening, and apparently the time when most people were asleep, certainly she knew that her bath was visible from the roof of the palace. Any immodesty on Bathsheba's part did not excuse David's sin, but she was still responsible for her wrong. We must never be occasion for sin in others, even in how we dress. Paul's word in 1 Timothy 2:9 is relevant here. The women should adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation. He saw a woman bathing. David's sin was not in seeing Bathsheba. It was unlikely that he expected or planned to see her. David's sin was in choosing to keep his eyes on an alluring image after the sight came before his eyes. Christians, men especially, must learn to never let their eyes or their mind rest on alluring images, except for what belongs to them in marriage. Belongs. Our eyes must bounce off alluring images that come into sight. David's many wives did not satisfy his lust. This was because you can't satisfy lusts of the flesh, because they are primarily rebellious assertions of self. It wasn't so much that David wanted Bathsheba, it was that he would not be satisfied with what God gave him. The principle would be illustrated in an exaggerated way in the life of Solomon, David's son. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. David and Solomon show us that if one woman isn't enough, 1,000 women aren't enough. The woman was very beautiful to behold. Bathsheba's great beauty made the sight tempting, but the real strength of temptation often does not lie in the quality of the tempting object, but in the state of heart and mind of the one being tempted. David was carefully prepared to stumble at this very point. Even so, this temptation was not too strong for David, no matter how beautiful Bathsheba was. For example, Joseph was more severely tempted to commit sexual immorality than David was here, but he fled that temptation. In Joseph's case, he was in the same house with the woman, and she advanced on him. Nevertheless, Joseph fled, where David sent a messenger. David looked at Bathsheba and said beauty, but God saw this as ugly. The pleasures of sin deceives us, like the bait hides the hook. We must call it what God calls it, sin. We want to say affair, but God says adultery. We want to say love, but God says lust. We want to say sexy, but God says sin. We want to say romantic, but God says ruin. We want to say destiny, but God says destruction. So David sent and inquired. David could have ended the temptation by leaving the scene at that time, even after entertaining the temptation for a while. Instead, David put himself into a more tempting situation. Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam? From this, David learned that the woman came from a notable family. She was from the upper classes. Her father was Eliam, one of David's mighty men. Her grandfather was Ahithophel, one of David's chief counselors, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. From this, David learned that Bathsheba was married, and the wife of another of David's mighty men. He also learned that this woman's husband was away, because the mighty men were away in battle against the Ammonites. This knowledge made the situation far more tempting. David began to think, I could get away with this. David committed adultery in his heart up on the roof. Now he knows that he has an opportunity to commit adultery in practice. Adultery in the heart and mind is bad. Adultery in practice is far worse. So it sounds like David did know about her marital status. David should have received the news of the woman's identity as a warning. He learned that the woman was related to men close to David. In taking Bathsheba, David sinned against Uriah, Eliam, and Ahithophel. Each man was close and important to David. But none of that was in his mind when he did it. Then David sent messengers and took her. In this, the man after God's heart went against his own heart, following through on a lustful impulse. David ignored every warning and way of escape God set before him. In the expression, he took her, and she came to him, there is no intimation whatever that David brought Bathsheba into his palace through craft or violence, but rather that she came at his request without any hesitation, and offered no resistance to his desires. Consequently, Bathsheba is not to be regarded as free from blame. No complaint is registered on her part, for what it's worth. He lay with her. David knew this was wrong, yet he did it. It's hard to explain David's thinking here, because he wasn't thinking. He acted on feeling and impulse instead of thinking. If David thought about all this, he would see the cost was so much greater than he wanted to consider at the time. If David only knew the that this illicit pursuit of pleasure would directly or indirectly result in an unwanted pregnancy, the murder of a trusted friend, a dead baby, his daughter raped by his son, one son murdered by another son, a civil war led by one of his sons, and a son who imitates David's lack of self-control, leading him and much of Israel away from God. Yeah, but in the heat of the moment, in the heat of passion, one rarely considers the ultimate outcome of what it is that you're doing. Which is why it's so important to prepare ourselves before something like this happens. Like they said previously, this was the culmination of many years of David not saying no to lust, but rather indulging it. If you make a breach in the wall, it's going to be easier for the enemy to pour in. The same kind of ruin comes of adultery today. We think about all the children who went to bed without daddy at home because of the terrible attack on the United States on September 11th, 2001, but far more children go to bed every night without daddy in the house because of adultery. At this moment, David agreed with the world's understanding of the purpose of sex, seeing it primarily as the pursuit of a pleasurable experience. With his many wives, David may have never really understood God's purpose for sex, to be the cement that helps bond together a one-flesh relationship. She was cleansed from her impurity. This confirms that Bathsheba had recently had her menstrual period and was not already pregnant when David committed adultery with her. It seems like David got away with this sin, but he and we could only think that if we believed the sin was something good, God wanted to keep from David. David did something harmful and destructive to himself and others, and harm and destruction will come of it. Just because David wasn't caught at that moment doesn't mean that he got away with anything. Yeah. And now his lustful liaison has produced this pregnancy, which has produced a panic in David of how is he going to hide it, which leads to murder in his case. And the woman conceived. David and Bathsheba didn't plan on this. They were terrified both at the problem of the pregnancy itself and that it meant that their adultery would be found out. So she sent and told David. Her message involved an appeal to him to take the necessary steps to avert the evil consequences of the sin, inasmuch as the law required that both the adulterer and adulteress should be put to death. Send me Uriah the Hittite. When David heard the disastrous news of Bathsheba's pregnancy, he should have used it as a prompting to repent. Instead, David did what most unrepentant sinners do. He tried to hide his sin. He wanted to draw Uriah back home to have relations with Bathsheba to give a reason for her pregnancy. The whole concept of hiding our sin is deceptive. Our sin is never hidden before God, and only hidden with difficulty from our conscience. Our hidden sin hinders our fellowship with God and others, and is a barrier to spiritual life and power. The real question for us all is, are we prepared to face sin, not to discuss someone else's sin, but to face our own? From Red Path. The answer to hidden sin is confession and repentance. To whom should we confess? The answer is in the question, whom have we sinned against? If you sin secretly, confess secretly, admitting publicly that you need the victory but keeping details to yourself. If you sin openly, confess openly, to remove stumbling blocks from those whom you have hindered. If you have sinned spiritually, prayerlessness, lovelessness, and unbelief, as well as their offspring, criticism, and so forth, then confess to the church that you have been a hindrance. As soon as ever we are conscious of sin, the right thing is not to begin to reason with the sin, or to wait until we have brought ourselves into a proper state of heart about it, but to go at once and confess the transgression unto the Lord, there and then, from Spurgeon. Yeah. The longer you let it go, the more it binds a place in your heart. David asked how Joab was doing, and how the people were doing, and how the war prospered. This was David's awkward attempt to pretend that nothing happened. David gave every appearance that things were normal, when before God, nothing was normal or right. "Go down to your house." David's design was that he should go and lie with his wife, that the child now conceived should pass for his, the honor of Bathsheba be screened, and his own crime concealed. At this time he had no design of the murder of Uriah, nor of taking Bathsheba to wife. From Clark. The Ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents. This shows that Uriah had a passion for the glory of God, even though he was a Hittite and not a native Jew. And this he showed himself to be more righteous than David. Because David at this time was in his palace, whereas the rest of his people were in this itinerant status of traveling and being in tents. "Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife?" This shows Uriah as a man of great integrity. He was a true team player, who did not want to enjoy the comforts of home as long as his fellow soldiers endured hardship on the field of battle. David had expected and hoped that Uriah would prove to be like himself. Instead, he proved to be like a man of integrity, whose first loyalty was to the king's interests rather than to his own pleasure. From Baldwin. "Wait here today also, and tomorrow I will let you depart." David lied to Uriah, knowing that he wanted to get back to the battlefront as soon as possible. He hoped that Uriah would treat the coming evening as his last before returning to battle, and be with Bathsheba. When David called him, he ate and drank before him. David hoped that getting Uriah drunk would weaken his resolve to identify with his fellow troops. Yet Uriah did not go down to his house, refusing to enjoy what his fellow soldiers could not, while the battle still raged. Uriah is a good example of how Christians should conduct themselves as fellow soldiers in the spiritual battle. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. David was drunk with lust when he slept with Bathsheba. He hoped making Uriah drunk with wine would bring the same result. But he did not go down to his house. Some commentators believe that Uriah suspected some infidelity in Bathsheba and avoided her out of jealousy. It is like he smelt something from trap. I don't know. I mean, from this it sounds like he didn't even see her, and that his main goal was to be faithful to the army and God. David wrote a letter to Joab. Mayer imagined Joab saying, "This master of mine can sing psalms with the best, but when he wants a piece of dirty work done, he must come to me." Set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle. Having failed to cover his sin, David wanted Uriah dead. Many adulterers secretly wished death would free them to marry the object of their adultery. This is the very heart of murder, even if the deed is not done. David had the power to act on his wish. Many of us don't necessarily have the power to act on our sin, but have the same heart as those who have. It's like Jesus said, out of the heart come these wicked things. It's not what goes into a man, but rather what comes out of him that defiles him, type thing. And he sent it forth by the hand of Uriah. David trusted the integrity of Uriah so much that he made him the unwitting messenger of his own death sentence. Take this message that orders your assassination and deliver it to the man who's going to assassinate you. This was the sum of treachery and villainy. He made this most noble man the carrier of letters which prescribed the mode in which he was to be murdered. From Clark. That he may be struck down and die. David commanded Joab to arrange Uriah's death. Though it was hidden by the raging battle, Uriah was murdered just as surely as if David killed him in his own home. If a child was to be born, Uriah's lips, at least, should not be able to disown it. From Mayer. David was better while a servant than when a king. For being a servant, he feared to kill Saul his adversary. But becoming a king, he basely slew his most faithful friend and dutiful subject. From Trap. Though we mourn over David's sin, yet we thank God that it was permitted, for if he had not so fallen, he had not been able to help us when we are conscious of transgression. He could not have so minutely described our griefs if he had not felt the same. David lived, in this respect, for others as well as for himself. From Spurgeon. And of course, this is not to say that let us sin all the more so that grace may abound, but rather that God dealt with David's sin here like he deals with all of our sin. That if we repent and turn to him, then we'll be saved. Uriah the Hittite died also. Joab did exactly what David commanded. He knew it was wrong, but simply followed orders and murdered Uriah at David's order. If not immediately confronted, one sin can take a wretched course. David indulged his sensual lusts for years and ignored God's warnings and ways of escapes. He allowed temptation to turn into lust, and lust to turn into adultery. When the consequences of his adultery threatened to expose his sin, he covered it first with deception and then with murder. Satan could never tempt David with the entire package at once, but he deceived him with it, piece by piece. Who struck Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth. This is a reference to Judges 9:50 through 57, where Abimelech was killed by coming too close to the walls of a city under siege. The idea is that Joab knew it was a bad military move to get so close to the walls, but he did it anyway on the command of David. Uriah the Hittite is dead also. David heard these words with relief. He thought that now he could marry Bathsheba and give a plausible explanation for her pregnancy. The sword devours one as well as another. This was a proverb regarding the fortunes of war. It was a way of saying, these things happen. David said it to his own guilty conscience as much as he said it to Joab. When the wife of Uriah heard that her husband was dead, we have no reason to believe that Bathsheba knew that David arranged the death of her husband. It is likely that David concealed all this from Bathsheba. At the same time, she was partly relieved to hear of her husband's death. There is little doubt to be made, but that she was inwardly glad, considering her danger of being punished as an adulteress, and her hopes of being now made a queen from trap. And she became his wife. This was nothing new for David. He had wives before, so now he simply added another. David is a sort of hero now in the eyes of the people. He has taken into his harem the poor, pregnant wife, the widow of one of his fallen captains, so that the people say, "My, look at the way he stands behind his men. He takes care of their widows when they are killed in battle. My, what a marvelous king." From Smith. The thing that David had done displeased the Lord. This is the first mention of God in the chapter. God witnessed every event and read the intent of every heart, but his displeasure is only implied until the specific statement. David's state of heart in the intervening year is reflected in Psalm 32, 1 through 5. Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile. When I kept silent, my bones grew old through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was turned into the drought of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. Psalm 32 shows that David was under intense conviction during this time, and that all the joy in his life evaporated away. David knew the stress and agony of living a double, false life. He found no relief until he repented and got right with God again. The better the man, the dearer the price he pays for a short season of sinful pleasure. From Mayer. David was in that terrible place when he had too much sin in him to be happy in God, but he had too much God in him to be happy in sin. Because David was a man after God's heart, God drew David to repentance and restoration. When there is the most necessity for confession, there is often the greatest tardiness in making it. It was so in David's case. I think I can see why he could not have gone straight away from the sin to confession, for the sin prevented the confession. The sin blinded the eye, stultified the conscience, and stupefied the entire spiritual nature of David. From Spurgeon. Yeah, sin will take you farther than you want to go. The initial reward in mind that David had was a short fling with Bathsheba, but it ended up in the murder of her husband. He didn't have that initially in his mind, but through the luring of sin, of indulging his sinful passions rather than submitting to God, it took him farther than he wanted to go and ended up in murder. Let that be a lesson to all of us, that sin will take you farther than you want to go. We have this habit of constantly saying, oh, it's just a tiny white lie, or a small sin, and oh, it's not that bad type thing. All of these are breaches in the wall of allowing the enemy to set up an encampment, and opens us up to further offensives of sin and lust. Best to deal with them now. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.